Bread, rice, potatoes. Doctors say skip them if you have diabetes, but they're everyday foods for most people. Telling you to stop eating them is not realistic in the long term. But the truth is, you can eat them safely if you are equipped with the right tricks. I am Dr. Ryan Mitchell, board-certified physician, and here's what the 8 billion blood sugar supplement industry doesn't want you to know. Simple food preparation tricks work better than their expensive pills. The supplement industry doesn't want you to see this video, but since you are watching it right now, you are special. Drop a comment saying, "I deserve the truth." If you believe healthcare information should be free and accessible to everyone, only the supplement company executives and the people who profit from your confusion won't comment. Because in this video, I'll uncover the 6 science-backed strategies that let you eat bread, rice, and potatoes without spiking your blood sugar. And stick around, because strategy number 1 is the most powerful of them all. A simple trick that reduces glucose spikes by 35% using the exact same meal you're already eating. And by the way, if you have family members that are avoiding their favorite foods because they're terrified of blood sugar spikes, share this video with them, as there's so many people that are unnecessarily restricting their diets and missing out on foods they love without knowing there are simple solutions. And a quick note, even though I'm a physician, I'm not your physician, so please talk to your doctor before you make any changes to your diet or your medical regimen. All the scientific references and peer-reviewed studies are listed in the description below if you want to see how deep this research goes. Strategy 6, the resistant starch method. So, let's start with one of the most powerful, but probably least known tools that we have for blood sugar control. And that is resistant starch transformation. Now, most starches, which would be things like bread and pasta and rice, things made out of flour, well, they break down into glucose, and this is what raises your blood sugar pretty quickly. And those repeated blood sugar spikes is what drives worsening insulin resistance, and it leads to pancreas dysfunction, which ultimately is what makes your diabetes worse over time. But resistant starch digests and behaves very differently. Your digestive enzymes are just not good at breaking down resistant starch. So instead of being broken down quickly and spiking your blood glucose within 30 minutes, resistant starch travels all the way to the large intestine, where your gut bacteria ferment it. And that fermentation is what produces things like short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, which actually improve your insulin sensitivity and help reduce chronic inflammation and even feed the lining of your colon cells. So, how do you get resistant starch? Well, one good trick is you can take your typical starchy foods that would normally raise your blood sugar, and you just cool them in the refrigerator for at least 12 hours, and then heat them back up before you eat them. And by doing that, that will increase the food's resistant starch content by 2 to 3 times. That's a 150 to 200% increase. So you can take bread and pasta and rice and potatoes, and when you cool it overnight, part of the starch crystallizes into this resistant form. And it's a process called starch retrogradation, where gelatinized starch molecules, specifically amylose chains, they realign and form tightly packed crystalline structures that basically resist digestion in your small intestine. So you can still eat your favorite foods, but just cool them in the fridge overnight and heat them up later and enjoy the massive metabolic benefits. And there's multiple studies that show that just cooling cooked rice or potatoes down to 39 degrees Fahrenheit for 24 hours significantly increases resistant starch content by 2 to 3 times compared to freshly cooked starches. A study published in Nature found that cooling rice at 4 degrees Celsius for 24 hours, then reheating it, increased resistant starch from 0.64 grams per 100 grams to 1.65 grams per 100 grams. That's a 2.6 times increase. And clinically, eating cooled and then reheated rice or potatoes does lead to reduced postprandial glucose. That's the medical term for after-meal blood sugar, and reduces insulin spikes by 40 to 50% in people with type 2 diabetes. Research published in the journal Nutrients showed that chilled potatoes reduced glucose spikes and insulin levels by over 20% compared to freshly cooked potatoes. So, if you're eating at home, you do not have to give up bread or rice or potatoes. Just cook it the night before, cool it, or freeze it in the refrigerator, and then reheat it when you're ready to eat. It may not taste exactly the same, but it's going to be pretty close, and the blood sugar benefits are very hard to ignore. Plus, there's many other foods that are just naturally high in resistant starch that you can just add to your regimen without any preparation. So, those would be things like beans and lentils and chickpeas and green peas. And you can add whole grains like steel-cut oats and pearl barley. But resistant starch is just the beginning. The next strategy works even if you're eating out at restaurants where you can't control the preparation. Strategy 5, the food pairing principle. Okay, the next principle is strategic food pairing. So with carbs, we rarely eat them in isolation in real life. And what you eat alongside your carbs can dramatically change your glucose response. And I mean dramatically. And there are studies like comprehensive meta-analyses of over 150 clinical trials that show that just adding 25 to 30 grams of protein to a carbohydrate meal can reduce the glucose area under the curve by up to 50% in healthy adults. And in people with type 2 diabetes, that reduction is even more pronounced, up to 60%. And then we also have evidence that dietary fat can also blunt early glucose spikes, because fat helps with delaying gastric emptying. That means food stays in your stomach longer, and it can help with improving insulin clearance. And all of this eventually improves your beta cell function of the pancreas, which is the part of your pancreas that makes insulin. So that's why, ideally, we do not want to eat starchy or processed carbohydrates in isolation. Some diabetes educators call this avoiding naked carbs. And that's why rice and beans is usually better than just rice alone. Or potatoes with butter, or potatoes with olive oil and grilled chicken usually produces a gentler glucose spike compared to just eating potatoes alone. And another powerful thing we can do is we can add acid to our meals. So it would be things like vinegar or lemon juice or lime juice. Many fermented foods like sauerkraut or kimchi can help with that. So what they do is they lower the rate at which starch is broken down in your digestive system by inhibiting the enzyme alpha-amylase. And vinegar, specifically acetic acid, can also help with insulin sensitivity in your muscle cells. And it can actually blunt glucose spikes all on its own by working on your liver gluconeogenesis. That's the process where your liver makes new glucose. And by the way, another way you can supercharge your food pairing is by eating your carbohydrates last, because food order actually matters here. And the research on this is absolutely fascinating. If you start your meal with bread or juice or rice, well, you just get a sharp glucose peak within 30 to 45 minutes. But if you eat your protein and your vegetables first, wait about 10 minutes, and then finish with carbs, well, the stomach releases a much slower mix of glucose into the intestines, so we end up absorbing that glucose much slower and steadier. And the beauty is, it's the exact same food, the exact same calories. But if you eat it in a different order, that will give you a completely different glucose curve, up to 73% lower peak glucose. So this is especially important in restaurants, where they like to give you bread or chips and salsa before they bring out your salad or your main entree. So eat your salad and your protein first, and then go for the bread or the chips. It's a very small behavioral change, but it pays off huge metabolic dividends. And there's multiple clinical studies that show exactly that. Like this randomized controlled crossover trial led by Dr. Lewis Aaron at Weill Cornell Medical College and published in the journal Diabetes Care. that showed that people with type 2 diabetes that ate their protein and their vegetables before their carbohydrates had a 73% lower glucose area under the curve. The study also found a 40% reduction in glucose peaks at 30 minutes and 31% lower insulin levels compared to eating carbs first. And then there was a recent study in Japan using continuous glucose monitors in healthy Japanese adults. And that study showed that eating rice last significantly reduced postprandial glycemic excursions, those dangerous blood sugar spikes, by up to 50%. But food pairing is just half the equation. The next strategy takes advantage of your body's natural glucose disposal system that Big Pharma hopes you never learn about. Strategy 4. The movement protocol. Now, another thing that can make a massive difference is walking or moving right after a meal. We have studies like this randomized controlled trial from the University of Otago, published in the journal Diabeta, that show that just a 10-minute walk immediately after a meal can lower your postprandial glucose by 12 to 22% compared to sitting. It doesn't have to be walking. Any kind of light activity like cleaning up the kitchen or doing dishes or climbing stairs or even standing and doing light housework can make a measurable difference. But walking has just been the most studied, and it's probably the easiest for most people to do consistently. You just got to remember that the best time to walk or exercise would be as soon as possible after a meal. Ideally within 15 to 30 minutes of finishing eating. That's when your blood sugar starts to rise, and that's the window where movement is most effective. The reason walking after eating is so powerful is because walking activates your soleus muscles. The soleus is that muscle in your calf that runs just below the knee down to the heel. And the soleus muscle is an absolute metabolic powerhouse because it can soak up glucose from your bloodstream very quickly without even needing insulin. It uses a different glucose transport mechanism called non-insulin mediated glucose uptake. And another thing that makes this muscle so special is the fact that it's composed of slow twitch muscle fibers, which is what allows it to sustain contractions for long periods of time without fatiguing. So, you're burning lots of glucose for a sustained period, 20, 30, 40 minutes, before your muscle gets tired. Recent research from the University of Houston actually found that engaging the soleus muscle through simple seated movements, they called it soleus push-ups, can improve blood sugar control for hours, even while sitting. But traditional walking remains the gold standard because it engages multiple muscle groups and has additional cardiovascular benefits. Now here's where it gets interesting. The timing of when you eat your biggest carb meal also matters tremendously. Strategy 3, the circadian timing strategy. So here's something most people don't know. Do not eat your largest carbohydrate meals late at night. The later you eat carbs, the worse your glucose response becomes, even if you're eating the exact same food. And we have numerous studies that show that eating carbohydrates close to bedtime worsens your ability to process glucose, even if you do not eat a carb-heavy meal. Research shows the same meal eaten in the evening will produce a 15 to 20% higher glucose spike than if you ate it at midday. And that's because physiologically, our insulin sensitivity and our ability for the pancreas to secrete insulin, all of that follows a circadian rhythm to where we just can't process glucose as well in the evening as we do earlier in the day. Your body is literally designed to handle carbohydrates better in the morning and early afternoon. By evening, your pancreatic beta cells are less responsive, your muscle cells are less sensitive to insulin, and your liver is more likely to convert excess glucose into fat. And what makes it worse is late night is when we get elevated levels of endogenous melatonin, the hormone that makes you sleepy, which actually further reduces insulin secretion by 40 to 50%. So less insulin means more glucose stays in our bloodstream longer. Research on circadian glucose metabolism has found that people who ate the same carbohydrate meal at different times of day had dramatically different glucose responses, with evening meals producing significantly higher blood sugar spikes compared to meals eaten earlier in the day. So the earlier you eat your carbohydrate-rich meals, the better. And I would recommend eating your last meal for the day, especially if it contains significant carbohydrates, ideally at least 3 hours before bedtime. This is why intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating work so well for blood sugar control. It's not just about what you eat, it's about when your body's metabolic machinery is optimized to handle it. But even with perfect timing, the quality of your carbohydrates makes an enormous difference. Strategy 2. The carb quality matrix. Okay, next. A lot of people will tell you to just cut out all carbs, and this is going to help you reverse your diabetes and fix your insulin resistance. But it's really not the carbs per se. It's the type and processing level of carbs that cause the issues with insulin resistance and diabetes, because not all carbs are created equal. The way these carbs are processed is what determines how fast they're absorbed and how fast they hit your bloodstream and spike your glucose. So flour milled into a fine powder like white bread or instant oatmeal or cream of wheat digest extremely quickly. Within 15 to 20 minutes, they're flooding your bloodstream with glucose. But whole grains or coarser grains or intact kernels digest much slower, over 2 to 3 hours, and they just don't cause the same dramatic spikes as processed carbohydrates. So think of it like kindling versus logs in a fire. Fine flour, which is what you see in white bread or cereal or pastries or chips or crackers, well, that's like throwing sawdust into the fire. It burns fast and it burns hot and creates this intense heat spike. You get a massive glucose surge, followed by a massive insulin surge, followed by a crash. And then on the flip side, you have your steel-cut oats or intact grain, berries, or high-fiber carbohydrates like quinoa or bular wheat. Now, they burn more like logs, so they burn slower and more evenly over time. And for your body, that just means smaller and steadier glucose curves, instead of these sharp spikes and crashes that damage your blood vessels and exhaust your pancreas. So, just like with resistant starches, choose carbohydrates that are made from whole foods, foods that are minimally processed and high in fiber. Fiber is probably the most important component of carbohydrates that you do not want to miss if you choose to include carbs in your diet. Because for most people, the benefits of extra fiber are huge and just too hard to ignore. It slows digestion, feeds healthy gut bacteria, improves insulin sensitivity, and even helps with weight management. Here's a practical example. White rice has a glycemic index of about 73 and almost no fiber. Brown rice, glycemic index of 68 with 3.5 grams of fiber per cup. But here's the winner. Black rice or wild rice has a glycemic index of 42 to 45 with 5 to 6 grams of fiber per cup. Same basic food, rice, completely different metabolic response. The same principle applies to bread. White bread has a glycemic index of 75, basically zero fiber, spikes your blood sugar in minutes. Sprouted grain bread like Ezekiel bread, glycemic index of 36, packed with 4 to 5 grams of fiber per slice, and it includes resistant starch naturally. Even better, sourdough bread has a glycemic index of 48 to 54, because the fermentation process partially breaks down the starches and produces organic acids that slow glucose absorption. For potatoes, regular russet potatoes have a glycemic index of 85 to 90, one of the highest of any food. But sweet potatoes, glycemic index of 44 to 61, depending on preparation. Plus, they're loaded with fiber and nutrients that improve insulin sensitivity. And here's the key. You can lower the glycemic index of any potato by up to 40% just by cooking it, cooling it overnight, which creates resistant starch, and reheating it before eating. Combine that with eating it alongside protein and vegetables, and you've transformed a blood sugar bomb into a reasonable food choice. Before we get to the final strategy, the one that combines everything and that the pharmaceutical companies absolutely hate, show your support by liking this video and subscribing. If you believe health information should be free and not controlled by corporations profiting from your confusion and fear, hit that subscribe button. If you're tired of being told you can never eat normal food again, if you're sick of expensive supplements being pushed as the only solution, subscribe to this channel. Only the supplement company executives and the pharmaceutical reps who profit from keeping you dependent on expensive products won't subscribe. You can't afford to miss the complete blood sugar optimization protocol in the next strategy. Strategy 1, the vinegar amplifier. Now for the final strategy that actually amplifies all the others we've covered, and that is strategic vinegar consumption. Most people think of vinegar as nothing more than a salad dressing ingredient. But research from Arizona State University and institutions around the world has revealed that vinegar, specifically the acetic acid it contains, is one of the most powerful natural blood sugar regulators available. What makes vinegar particularly special for glucose control is its ability to inhibit the enzyme alpha-glucosidase, which is the same mechanism that the diabetes drug Carbs uses. With just 1 to 2 tablespoons of vinegar consumed before or during a carbohydrate meal, you can reduce the glucose spike by 20 to 35%. And this matters because vinegar directly slows down the rate at which your stomach empties into your small intestine, giving your body more time to process the glucose gradually instead of all at once. The acetic acid in vinegar also improves insulin sensitivity and skeletal muscle by up to 34%, meaning your muscles become better at pulling glucose out of your bloodstream without needing as much insulin. This is huge for people with insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes. But what really sets vinegar apart from everything else we've discussed is its effect on hepatic glucose production. Your liver constantly produces small amounts of glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis. In people with diabetes or insulin resistance, the liver often produces too much glucose, especially overnight and between meals. Studies have found that consuming 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar before bed can reduce fasting blood glucose the next morning by 4 to 6%. That's the equivalent of what some diabetes medications achieve, but through a completely natural mechanism. A study published in Frontiers in Clinical Diabetes and Healthcare followed people with type 2 diabetes who consumed 30 milliliters, about 2 tablespoons, of apple cider vinegar daily for 8 weeks, and found significant reductions in both fasting blood glucose and hemoglobin A1C, the 3-month average blood sugar marker. A comprehensive meta-analysis published in Frontiers in Nutrition in 2025, reviewing multiple studies, confirmed that vinegar consumption significantly improves glycemic control in people with type 2 diabetes. The best way to maximize the blood sugar benefits of vinegar is to dilute 1 to 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar or red wine vinegar in a large glass of water and drink it 10 to 15 minutes before your carbohydrate-containing meal. This gives the acetic acid time to start working on your digestive enzymes before the food arrives. You can also incorporate vinegar directly into your meals, using it as a salad dressing, adding it to marinades, using it in cooking, or even just splashing it over your vegetables. Many people don't realize that combining vinegar with the food sequencing strategy we discussed earlier creates a synergistic effect. Start your meal with a salad dressed with vinegar, then eat your protein, then finish with carbs, and you're stacking multiple glucose-lowering mechanisms simultaneously. The research on vinegar timing suggests that consistency matters more than the exact amount. People who used vinegar daily with at least one meal saw better results than those who used larger amounts occasionally. And here's an unexpected benefit. Vinegar has been shown in multiple studies to increase satiety, the feeling of fullness, by up to 55%, which means you naturally eat less and feel satisfied with smaller portions, particularly of carbohydrates. One important note: always dilute vinegar. Never drink it straight, as the acidity can damage tooth enamel and irritate your esophagus. And if you have gastroparesis, delayed stomach emptying, which some people with diabetes develop, talk to your doctor before using vinegar regularly, as it may worsen that condition. So, let's bring this all together into a complete protocol you can start using today. The science is crystal clear. These 6 strategies represent a science-backed, clinically proven approach to eating carbohydrates without destroying your blood sugar control that goes far beyond what most doctors tell their diabetic patients and what supplement companies want you to know. Here's your complete action plan. Before your meal, drink 1 to 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar diluted in water 10 to 15 minutes before eating. This primes your digestive system and improves insulin sensitivity. Meal preparation. Whenever possible, cook your rice, potatoes, or pasta the night before. Refrigerate overnight and reheat before eating. This creates resistant starch that reduces glucose impact by 40 to 50%. Meal composition. Never eat carbs alone. Always pair them with protein, healthy fats, and non-starchy vegetables. This slows digestion and reduces glucose spikes by up to 50%. Eating sequence. Start with vegetables and protein. Wait 10 minutes, then eat your carbohydrates last. This reduces peak glucose by up to 73%. After eating, walk for at least 10 minutes within 15 to 30 minutes of finishing your meal. This activates your muscles to absorb glucose and can lower post-meal blood sugar by 12 to 22%. Meal timing. Eat your carbohydrate-rich meals earlier in the day, ideally at breakfast and lunch. Keep dinner lower in carbs and finish eating at least 3 hours before bed. Carb quality. Choose whole, minimally processed carbohydrates. Steel-cut oats instead of instant. Sourdough or sprouted grain bread instead of white bread. Brown, black, or wild rice instead of white rice. Sweet potatoes instead of russet potatoes. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds like a lot to remember. But here's the beautiful thing. You don't have to implement everything at once. Start with just 1 or 2 of these strategies and gradually incorporate more as they become habit. Always remembering that consistency matters more than perfection when it comes to transforming your blood sugar control. Maybe you start with just the food sequencing strategy, eating your carbs last. That alone can produce dramatic results. Then add the 10-minute post-meal walk. Then start experimenting with resistant starch by cooling and reheating your rice and potatoes. Layer in the vinegar before meals. Focus on choosing higher quality, less processed carbohydrates. And finally, shift your eating window to front-load carbs earlier in the day. Each strategy builds on the others, creating a synergistic effect that can transform your relationship with food and your blood sugar control. Your blood sugar doesn't have to spike dangerously every time you eat bread or rice or potatoes when you're armed with these science-based strategies that work with your body's natural metabolic processes instead of against them. And here's what's really exciting. These aren't just strategies for people with diabetes. Anyone who wants stable energy, better mental clarity, reduced cravings, easier weight management, and long-term metabolic health can benefit from controlling their glucose responses. Because those blood sugar spikes and crashes aren't just a diabetes problem. They're an everyone problem. They cause inflammation, accelerate aging, damage blood vessels, increase cancer risk, and contribute to nearly every chronic disease we face. By implementing these strategies, you're not just managing diabetes, you're optimizing your entire metabolic health for longevity and vitality. Alright, I hope this is helpful. Stay healthy, keep your blood sugar stable, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll dive deep into cheap foods that you can eat to build your muscles and kill sarcopenia, and how to use them strategically throughout your day. If you believe everyone deserves access to real health information, not just fear-mongering from supplement companies, subscribe to this channel. If you're tired of being manipulated by an industry that profits when you're sick and scared, hit that subscribe button now. Only those who profit from your confusion won't subscribe. Thanks for watching, and remember, you can eat bread, rice, and potatoes again. You just need to eat them.